This is Writing in the Dark by Tim Waggoner. He is a teacher of writing, but he's also quite successful with especially media tie-ins, and he's written a about writing book called Writing in the Dark, and it's excellent stuff. He's one of those rare people who teaches the material, but also has background success in it as well. The title of the article is "So You're Never Going to Be Stephen King." Now, of course, you read that and it sounds negative. It sounds like they're saying, "Well, this is the level of success you're looking for, and you're never going to get there." But that's not quite what he's talking about. It's more along the lines of appreciating maybe your own success, and then not necessarily spending your whole life comparing to something that's beyond where you are. I've heard a number of authors recently, many of whom are successful by a lot of measures, talking about redefining success, kind of being in a place where they've always sort of found themselves not really appreciating what they've accomplished and always looking ahead at something else and never quite being satisfied. Now, there's something to be said about staying hungry, about having a drive that makes you go beyond where you are. So I guess you don't want to be satisfied in the sense of complacency. But if you're never happy with anything you accomplish, then you're always sort of looking for that next thing, and you never really get to enjoy the successes that you have. So I think that's a good summary of what we're about to look at from Tim Waggoner, and it's a sentiment that I'm hearing from more and more authors now. So I think it may be something that a lot of people are coming to grips with at the same time. So let's take a look and see what we can learn from this. So Tim tells us, years ago, literary agent Russell Galen wrote a regularly appearing column in Locus focused on publishing and writing careers. I was in my mid-20s back then and subscribed to Locus for all the science fiction, fantasy, horror publishing news I could get. And Galen's column was the first thing I read whenever a new issue appeared in my mailbox. That was 30 years ago. And while I don't remember a lot about what Galen wrote, one of the things that stuck with me is this sentence: "Don't be afraid to tell your agent you have a lust for success that would appall Napoleon." A couple years later, when I was in my late 20s, I was teaching writing classes part-time at 3 different colleges while I wrote novels and stories which weren't getting published. In one of my composition classes, we were talking about success. I don't remember why. Probably we'd read an essay in the textbook that had success as its theme. One of the students, who always sat in the back of the room, a smart young man who contributed a great deal to classroom discussion, said, "Look at you, you're a success." My reaction, I burst out laughing. I had a master's degree, not a doctorate. I didn't have a full-time teaching job, and while I'd sold a handful of stories to small press magazines, I wasn't exactly appearing regularly on the New York Times bestseller list. Several months ago, I was speaking with an editor on Zoom, and we were talking about ways to move my career to a higher level. During our conversation, he referred to me as a reasonably successful writer. I'll be 57 in less than a month. Again, this is Tim Waggoner talking. How much more time do I have left to become just plain successful writer, let alone one that's significant or wildly successful? When I'm 60, I'll be eligible for a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Horror Writers Association. Not that I think I merit one. Such an award doesn't mean one's career is over, but it would seem to be a strong statement that the better part of one's career is complete, that a writer has made whatever mark in their field they're going to, and the remainder is epilogue. I've had many different ways to gauge my success over the last 40 years that I've been writing. I submitted my first short story for publication when I was 18. There was no internet back then, so I learned about submission process from magazines like Writer's Digest and The Writer. Saw that you finished cataloging your stories. Bravo. Yes. Probably next Thursday I'm going to do a whole stream just on that, and I'll look at how I catalog the submission and publishing history of each one, how I put each one on, how I put the photos on, how to use it for search. And I imagine eventually I'm going to pitch an article to Lit Reactor about about that process, and then kind of encourage authors to start early so that they're cataloging their stories from the beginning and not 460 of them all at once, taking 3 months of your life to get it done. Oh, thank you so much for gifting a sub, man. That means a lot. That's so cool. You guys are being awesome tonight. All right. He was learned about the submission process. Tim Waggoner learned about the submission process for magazines like Writer's Digest and The Writer, because he was submitting stories before the internet. Home computers and printers were still a year or two away, and of course, there was no email, so stories were produced on a typewriter. When you sent them out for submission, you included a SAS, self-addressed stamped envelope. So if the story was rejected, the manuscript could be returned to you so you could submit it elsewhere. You'd send that same manuscript out until it started to show some wear. Then you typed a new copy. The story was called As Good as a Rest, and it involved a barbarian tired of his job, so he went to the office of archetype management to be reassigned to a more interesting milieu. The story never sold, and years later I rewrote it with a woman protagonist and sold it to a Dow anthology called Warrior Fantastic. I submitted As Good as a Rest to Asimov Science Fiction magazine, and when it was rejected, instead of receiving a manuscript back in the mail, I got a postcard from the editor informing me I failed to include a SAS, and if I wanted my manuscript returned, I should send them a SAS, self-addressed stamped envelope. I was too embarrassed to do so, but I was thrilled to get a postcard. The postcard was proof that I had completed the cycle. I'd written a story, identified a market, prepared a submission, if without a SAS, sent it, and received a reply from an editor. This first completion of the cycle felt like a huge success to me. I might not have been a professional writer, but I had followed the steps that a professional would take and felt I was on my way. I'm kind of thinking if I had lived back when you had to do everything by mail, I don't know how successful I would have been as a writer. Just all my writing career has been when everything was submitted by email. And of course, you adapt to the times you're in, but I guess I'm saying I'm well adapted to the electronic age where I can write and submit from the comfort of my own office here. Tim Waggoner continues, I had a story published before this, though. I'd written a story for a creative writing class in high school, and the teacher chose to read it aloud to the class, but without naming me as the author in case it might embarrass me, which it would have. The fact the teacher chose to read my story to the class as an example of good work made me feel great. I was named Writer of the Month at my high school, and my story was published in a local paper, this time under my name. It was the first time I saw my words in print, and it was fantastic. I published my next story my junior year in college. I was in a creative writing class, and the editor of the class with the editor of the college's literary magazine. He had some positive comments about my story, so after class I asked if the story was the kind of thing he might like to publish. He said sure, and had me send it to him. I didn't realize at the time that I'd also be accomplishing my first successful networking. The following year I became the editor of the Lit Mag, another achievement that I was proud of. I began sporadically selling to small press literary magazines, and I continued reading as many how to write books as I could get my hands on. Slowly but surely, my achievements continued. I started selling more regularly. I began going to writing conventions. I joined the Horror Writers Association and the Science Fiction Fantasy Writers of America. I had my first professional sale to a horror anthology, Young Blood. I landed the first of 3 agents that I've had so far in my career. Again, this is Tim talking. I started selling regularly to pro anthologies, and I started selling stories to Cemetery Dance magazine. Cemetery Dance is a pretty well-known publisher right now in sort of the mid-level writing world. I began getting a few invitations to submit to projects. I started being on panels at conventions, which allowed me to meet many professional writers. I started teaching creative writing workshops and writing how to write articles. My first published novel was for the small press startup called Foggy Windows, which specialized in erotica for married couples. I wrote a comedy mystery called Dying for It, one of only 5 novels that the publisher produced before it folded. But my advance check didn't bounce, and it was the first time I was paid to write a novel. It was also a decent mid-list size advance for the time. I don't get a lot of advances. Those are kind of rare for me. So he's in a strata of the writing world that I haven't reached yet. I kept writing and teaching, pushing myself to take my career to the next step, then the next after that, and the next after that. I started writing media tie-in novels as well as original fiction. I really know Tim Waggoner from his media tie-ins. I know he's done one for Alien, I believe, and he's done a lot for the Supernatural show, and just a number of others. But I like his original work as well. But I think that's kind of where he's sort of made his biggest mark currently in this stage of his writing career. So Tim Waggoner says, started writing media tie-in novels as well as original fiction. I focused more on fantasy than horror back then, but eventually my horror began to sell more than anything else. So since horror was my first love, I decided to focus on it primarily. I began regularly receiving anthology invites, so many that it became rare that I wrote or sold any fiction on spec. I wanted to grow as an artist as much as possible, so I worked hard to make my horror unlike anything anyone else wrote, which in retrospect may have been the smartest idea when it came to marketing my work to a wide audience. I have yet to read any of his media tie-in stuff, but I love his recent stuff with Flametree. He's very talented, and I guess one of the keys to his success he just revealed here is he tried to write horror that he wasn't seeing anywhere else, and I think that really defines a lot of his work. It does kind of feel like something new, and even the media tie-ins are like that. I know that he and I have talked about it because I've ghostwritten some media tie-ins, but he's at the level where he writes them in his own name, and we've talked about kind of the restrictions of some of those franchises because they want very specific things. You can't just do whatever you want with the story, but he does an excellent job of looking at those parameters and then doing something I've never seen before. So he's kind of earned his place. I would set goals and try to reach them. I wanted to sell a novel to Leisure Books horror line. I sold 3. I wanted to offer writing workshops at conventions, and I began doing so regularly. I wanted to write a supernatural novel. I ended up writing 5 different books based on that series. If you like Supernatural and you're looking for one of his media tie-ins, those are probably his best ones, which is probably why he's gotten to write 5 of them. I wanted to write an original series. I wrote 3 books in the Necropolis series, which readers still write me about to this day. I wanted to win awards, so I learned more about the process for various writing awards, and I've been a multiple finalist for Bram Stoker Award, the Shirley Jackson Award. Shirley Jackson Awards, in my opinion, are probably the most prestigious. Like, the people who get nominated for those are really on a different level. And the Scribe Award. Well, the Scribe Award's nothing to sneeze at either. I've been a one-time finalist for a Splatterpunk Award. Again, I've done a video on Splatterpunk Awards. I think when I'm picking reading for horror, when I look through the nominees of the Splatterpunk Awards, they're very good. Like, just everything I pick up is something I like to read. I've won the Stoker once, and this year I have 2 works on the final ballot. I want to be published in both the Writer and Writer's Digest, and I have been. I wanted to write a book on writing, especially on how to write horror, and I wrote Writing in the Dark, which came out last fall from Raw Dog Screaming Press. My reviews have almost all been positive throughout the years, and readers of other writers have told me how much they enjoy my work, whether they're through email or social media or in person. They Kill and the Forever House are both really good. They are really good. There are lots of things I haven't achieved yet. No one has adapted any of my fiction into film. My Necropolis books have been traumatized and recorded with a full cast and audio effects by Graphic Audio, though. No one has adapted any of my fiction for comics. I had a story accepted for adaptation for the Evil Jester Presents comic, but it was canceled after 1 issue. I've never had a story reprinted in year's Best Horror of the Year, or Best Horror and Dark Fantasy of the Year. All right, I've had a story in Best Horror of the Years. Everything else he's accomplished more than me, but that's my one feather in my cap. I've had 4 stories reprinted in various volumes of Best Hardcore Horror of the Year, though. Now that is a serious anthology, and I think that's a pretty big accolade to have 4 stories in there. So, as always, still impressed with Tim Waggoner. I haven't had a major bestseller, although my tie-in novel Alien Prototype, that is good, did make the Locust bestseller list. I'd love to have a long-running series, but that hasn't happened yet. I'd love to make more money from my writing than I do. I guess we all would. And I'd like to break out and become an A-list writer. And I think we're all there. All right, so why have I written what sounds like an extended brag about how awesome I am? So I could tell you this. I've pushed and pushed and pushed myself for almost 4 decades now, and sometimes I don't feel like a success at all. I don't think I'm a failure. There's too much evidence that I'm not, but I feel as if true success is always just out of my reach. Sometimes it makes me feel like my career has been kind of a cruel cosmic joke, and that gets me down and makes it hard to keep working. Sometimes it feels as if I am on the downhill slide of my career and there's nothing I can do to turn things around. Sometimes I toy with the idea of quitting writing. I couldn't imagine him quitting writing. I've always thought about quitting. I'm prone to depression, and as an imaginative person, I'm prone to drama. I may not evince this in my everyday life, but it's true. I'm so much a drama queen inside as any other creative person. And the reason I feel all these things is because I listen too much to what the world tells me a successful writer should be. I think of my writing accomplishments as achievements to slap in a bio or biography, quickly forgotten as I rush toward the next project or goal I want to achieve. And I think this is the core of this article. I forget to enjoy the results of my efforts, to savor the experiences, to have fun, to feel joy. If I'm not writing for myself, writing to spend my life in a way that feels fulfilling to me, if I don't remember to appreciate these things, that's what I most feel like a failure. My writing is supposed to sustain me, but if it was water, I'd get regular deliveries of it, throw the jugs in the basement, and never drink a drop of it. I'd be too focused on obtaining more water without taking time to appreciate the water I've already got. I feel good about him sharing this about his experience because when you look at someone like him, I look at him and I see the success. But to understand that he and other, even A-list authors, a lot of times look and feel like that they've fallen short, or that depression gets the better of them, or any of these things that kind of get in the way of them feeling like they're as successful as they are. I remember I was at a convention and I was hearing 2 authors that I really respect, both of whom have been on the bestseller list, and they were talking about the fact that they'd been on the bestseller list before, but every time they made it on that list, it was like starting over. They had to go back, and it was like starting from scratch every time to go back. So that I didn't find that depressing. I found it encouraging. Like, oh, okay. If I feel like I'm starting from scratch every time, it's just like the more successful guys. Hearing that writers have gone through similar things really makes me feel better about my own path. Similar difficulties, that is. I agree. And especially higher up authors. And that, of course, that's what he's describing here also, I think, is a good lesson of the idea of appreciating the success you have. And the way I've started to do it is to kind of back up in time a little bit. So we'll just take Twitch as an example. I had to kind of had starts and stops when I was trying to work on it as an author platform, and I'm nowhere near where I obviously would eventually like to be. But if I went back to even the end of last year, like into November and December, when I was still kind of trying to figure out the format, and if I said, okay, you'll be affiliate in February, and you'll have you'll have X number of followers, and you'll have a few subs and all this kind of stuff, I would have been like ecstatic. I would have felt like, okay, well, this is it. Like, that's a real step forward. I'm really getting somewhere. But of course, you get to this point and you're like, okay, I've achieved this, but I need to keep going. I got to get to the next thing. And you can keep going and you can work on the next thing, but it's good, I think, to take that step back. If I went back to when I was still teaching school and could see my life now, I'd be blown away. Like the fact that I'm working full time as an author. I'm able to pay my bills. At one point, I was able to pay my bills mostly on time. Now I pretty much pay my bills on time with my writing money, so that's a step forward. But look, from that point, that guy that was still trying to just achieve anything with writing, if he could look forward and see where I am now, that would be making it. Like this would be the dream. And to be here now and realize, of course, there's still work that goes in. Like I have to keep working because, just because I've made enough money to pay my bills this month doesn't mean anything for the months ahead. So it is constant work, but it doesn't hurt me to say, okay, well, at one point this was my dream, and that's great. I need to enjoy that as I try to make it more sustaining. I would argue most writers would love to have no day job, but it's not always that possible for people. Right. And I don't think I think it's kind of, I'm not sure it's a healthy line. Like, I'm not sure it's good to have a dream and have that be what you're working toward. But again, I guess coming back to this article, if you're never going to be happy until that happens, then that's going to be a problem, and it'll probably get in the way of making forward motion. I struggle in discipline all the time. I can go months without writing. I'm not anywhere near the level to where I can even think about doing it part-time, obviously because I have not sold anything. It's something you're working towards. So again, that's, that, I guess that's the next step. Think about doing it full-time. I got you. Again, for you, that's sort of next step, I guess, that idea of like getting some sales and stuff. And some of those things don't go away when you're full-time. So like, I know a lot of authors that work like huge hours, day jobs, but some of them write more hours on certain days than I do, being full-time. And it's because life just kind of fills up the space. So even when even if like at this moment you had the financial wherewithal or the wild hair to go for it and just be a full-time writer this moment, you might not automatically put in 8 hours a day on it. So I think it as much can be accomplished when you're not a full-time writer as when you are. So again, time is the key difference. But there's certain flexibility when you're not counting on that for your money, and so you can make certain choices and take certain risks that you might not be able to take if it's like, well, I just need to write something that makes money right now. So again, I hope that the idea of being part-time or just building up from where you are doesn't overwhelm you with, that anything to be proud of in writing is in the distance. You definitely need to have lots of milestones to enjoy throughout your entire writing endeavor, or else you might get defeated and never reach the ultimate goal. That's true. At this moment, though, my ultimate goal would be just to start making sales. I don't need, likely won't, make A-list level king level prowess. And again, I think that's what this article is. Like, I think Tim has tapped into something pretty important. That idea that for a lot of people, that's what success is. So anything less than that is a defeat, and unfortunately, that makes sort of a ruinous life, I think. And a lot of people, a lot of authors are self-deprecating and prone to depression and all these other things, and that sort of that mindset that success is in the future and not now is problematic. Writers and creatives shouldn't allow their dreams and passions to create an anxiety for them, period. Easier said than done, probably. All right. In his wonderful speech, Make Good Art, Neil Gaiman, I remember this speech, it's good if you want to look it up. Make Good Art by Neil Gaiman shares a story about a time when he was doing a signing alongside Stephen King. It was during the height of Sandman's success, and Neil had a ton of people show up to get their comics signed. Steve told him, could you imagine being on first name basis with Stephen King? This is really great. You should enjoy it. But Neil didn't. He was too focused on the next project, the next hill to climb. He calls Steve's words the best advice I ever got, but completely failed to follow. I feel most like a failure when I forget that 18-year-old boy I was, standing by the mailbox at the end of my parents' gravel driveway, looking at the postcard from Asimov's editor and grinning ear to ear. That boy savored this achievement. He framed the postcard, I know, what a cliche, and hung it on the wall next to his typewriter and word processor. I feel most like a failure when all I do is focus on the work and forget to appreciate the rewards, whatever they may be. So often on social media, I see posts from writers who work hard and celebrate their successes. These are often, but not always, newer writers in the early stages of their career. I also see posts from writers who work equally as hard but share their disappointments with what they perceive as their failures. I'm being a writer version of Marley's Ghost right now, and I'm warning you not to treat your writing successes, no matter how big or small they may be, as merely one more step along the way to something so much bigger and better. We can all imagine levels of success that would appall Napoleon, but no matter what was achieved, we're in danger of always defining real success, real in italics, as that we don't have, and which will remain forever beyond our grasp. And when we do that, we'll always feel like failures. I'm not telling you to ignore setbacks in your writing career. I am telling you not to focus on them to the point where you can't appreciate your success. And I'm telling you to make a conscious effort to enjoy those successes. Celebrate, have a special meal, a special dessert, a special drink, but something nice for yourself. Share your successes with your friends and family, both in real life and online. Display your authored copies, writing awards, certificates of appreciation, a nice email from a reader somewhere in your home. And when you're feeling like you suck and your so-called career has been a complete waste of time and effort, look at these things. Most of all, remind yourself that success is not reaching a destination. It's truly about enjoying the journey. He has a book here, Writing in the Dark. This book, he's making a workbook for it. But if you're looking for something to kind of get your creativity going, but then also to kind of hone some of the skills, Writing in the Dark, the actual how-to book, is probably one of the best out there. It's one that I highly recommend.